For 1,000 years the galaxy had lived in quiet harmony, no battles scarred the skies, no war fleets burned across the stars, and no children grew up with the sound of fear in their hearts. On every world markets were filled with laughter. Ships carried goods and knowledge instead of soldiers and weapons, and stories of war were told like old myths. Something that belonged to a darker age that no one wanted to return. Alien races grew soft in this peace. Some even forgot how to fight at all. They taught their young ones that violence was foolish and survival came from unity. It was a time of comfort. A time when the stars themselves seemed calmer. But deep under the quiet, something else was waiting, something that could not be erased by time or treaties. On a distant planet where the night sky burned with twin moons, a small outpost caught a signal. It was faint at first, just static mixed with an odd rhythm. The technicians frowned as they traced the sound. It was not natural. It was not cosmic noise or the hum of stars. It carried a pattern, something deliberate. The chief officer leaned closer to the screen, his eyes wide as the pulse repeated again and again. A message hidden in the silence of the void. The outpost sent reports to the Central Council, but many dismissed it as a system fault. After all, nothing dangerous had happened for 1,000 years. Who would dare disturb such long peace? Yet the officer could not sleep that night. He felt the signal was a shadow stretching across the stars. In great cities built of crystal and steel, alien leaders debated as whispers spread about the strange signal. Some argued it was just old technology reawakening, perhaps forgotten machines sending echoes across space. Others said it was a warning, a sign that someone or something was moving. But the most frightening thought came from the older members who still remembered the name whispered in fear. Humans. They had not been seen in centuries. Their colonies erased from memory. Their fleets silent. Many believed they had vanished. But in stories told by grandparents around dim fires, humans were not gone. They were only sleeping, waiting for the day when someone broke the silence. Merchants traveling between worlds began to share rumors, fleets spotted in the far rim, old shipyards glowing with activity, hidden bases alive with sparks of construction. Small skirmishes near uncharted systems where unknown vessels disappeared before scans could identify them. The traders laughed nervously as they told their tales. But inside their eyes held worry. Because peace had lasted too long, the galaxy had grown used to it. And anything strange now felt like the return of something far more dangerous. The signal from the outpost soon reached more ears. And slowly fear spread, soft at first, then louder. Children playing in the academies began asking questions about the past. They searched the archives and found almost nothing. Files locked, records sealed. History rewritten to hide the true horror of the wars before. One curious group stumbled across a single forbidden word, Deathworlders. They asked their teachers what it meant. But the teachers went pale and quickly silenced them. Still, whispers began to rise among the young. What kind of race had earned such a name? Why were they hidden from history, and why did the signal seem connected to those old myths? The hook tightened when an old professor, shaking as he spoke, told them to never say that word again, for it belonged to the humans. In hidden corners of the galaxy, ancient fleets stirred, ships long forgotten powered up after centuries of silence, engines coughed, lights glowed, weapons tested their systems. The sound of metal awakening echoed in the dark. It was as if something had been waiting for this exact moment. Some old promise carved into the stars. The council refused to believe. They wanted peace to last forever. But the shadow in the silence was growing larger, reaching across worlds, across systems, and across the hearts of those who could feel danger rising. Yet none dared to say the truth out loud. If the humans had returned, then peace was already broken. The silent millennium was cracking, not with explosions yet, not with screams, but with the weight of an old name whispered once more through the stars. Humans, the Deathworlders, the race that had vanished from history but never from memory. And now, with each strange signal, with each old ship waking, the galaxy held its breath. Because everyone knew that when humans laughed in the face of war, it was never just laughter. It was the sound of the end beginning. The council chamber glowed with the light of 1,000 stars, the tall windows stretching into the night sky as alien leaders gathered in haste. It was the first time in centuries that fear had filled this room. Their ancestors had built this chamber as a hall of peace, a place where differences were solved by words, not weapons. Yet now the air was thick with arguments, voices clashing against each other as the strange signal played again on the central display. The sound was steady, deliberate, like a heartbeat echoing from deep space, and no one could deny it anymore. The millennium of silence had been broken. The council leader raised his voice and demanded calm. But even he could not hide the tremor in his tone. What if this was more than a random signal? What if someone had truly returned from the dark edges of history? Across the galaxy, ordinary people began to notice the change. Ships that once carried food and luxuries now traveled under heavy guard. Travelers whispered about colonies going quiet, trade routes blocked by unknown fleets, and stars along the rim flickering with distant battles. Most did not believe it at first. They told themselves that the peace was too strong, too long, for war to ever return. But then the images began to arrive. Broken hulls drifting through space, stations burning with no survivors, signals calling for help only to end in static. These pictures spread like fire across networks, and the truth could no longer be hidden. The galaxy was under attack, but by whom, and why now after 1,000 years of peace? On a mining colony near the edge, families hid inside shelters as enemy ships passed overhead, their hulls sharp and black, their engines roaring with a sound that shook the ground. The miners clutched their children close, wondering why the invaders spared them, wondering if they were simply too unimportant to destroy yet. Some prayed to the stars, others cursed the council for being blind, but all felt the same dread. The invaders were not afraid. They moved with confidence, as if they knew no one would stop them, and in their shadows, people began to whisper one dangerous question. What if the humans were still alive? What if they returned? Would they be saviors or destroyers? In academies across many worlds, the younger generation searched harder. They wanted answers their leaders refused to give. Some hacked into forbidden archives, ignoring the glowing red warnings that said restricted. And there they found fragments, recordings so old they flickered with static, yet still powerful enough to chill their hearts. Humans walking on battlefields filled with fire, their fragile-looking bodies blooded but still standing, their eyes burning with a strange light. And, above all, their laughter, not the laughter of joy, but a deep, unsettling sound. The kind of laugh that came not from happiness but from defiance. The students watched in silence, none daring to speak, until one whispered, "If this is true, then the invaders have no idea what they have awakened." Meanwhile in the council, leaders argued over strategy. Some demanded the rebuilding of fleets, others begged for surrender before the enemy grew stronger. But a small group remained quiet. They were the oldest, the ones who had seen the last war when they were children. They knew why history had been erased. They knew the truth about the Deathworlders. Their voices were soft but carried weight. They warned the council not to act recklessly, not to provoke what might already be stirring. But no. One wanted to listen. Too many centuries of peace had made them arrogant. They believed they could control whatever came. But deep inside, they all remembered the legends, and it made them uneasy. In forgotten corners of space, more ships came alive, ancient war machines built by human hands long ago. Their hulls scarred yet unbroken. Systems dormant for centuries sparking back to life. Engines humming like growling beasts. They moved slowly at first, testing their strength. But then with purpose, heading toward the sound of the broken peace. Inside one such ship, men and women stood in silence as alarms lit up, their faces calm, their eyes sharp. One of them grinned. Another chuckled. And soon laughter filled the bridge. It was not madness. It was not joy. It was a promise. A reminder that for humans war was not an end. It was a beginning. Word spread quickly through the galaxy, not through official channels but through fear. The kind that spreads from one frightened voice to another. The invaders were coming, yes. But behind them there was something far worse. Something old. Something hidden. The name humans was spoken again. First in whispers, then in louder tones. And with each retelling the legend grew. Some said humans could not be killed. Others said they welcomed death as a friend. But all agreed on one thing: if the Deathworlders returned, the galaxy would never be the same. And perhaps the peace had been nothing more than an illusion waiting to shatter. The shadow of war grew larger with every passing day. But the true terror was not in the attacks. It was in the unknown. No one knew where the humans had gone. No one knew if they had survived. And no one knew why the laughter of an ancient race still echoed in every story told about them. As the signal repeated once more in the council chamber, the leader closed his eyes, for the first time in centuries feeling helpless, and he whispered to himself words that chilled the room. If the Deathworlders are coming, then the galaxy is already lost. The signal continued to echo across the stars, growing stronger, repeating like a drumbeat that no one could silence, and while the council argued endlessly and colonies lived in fear, young minds grew restless, In the great academies of the core world, students whispered about the rumors. They gathered in secret halls, sharing fragments of stories too old to be trusted yet too vivid to be false. They were told the humans had vanished long ago, wiped from the records, erased by treaties. But erasure could not kill curiosity, and curiosity is what drove a group of young scholars to search deeper. They wanted to know why the very word human was forbidden, why teachers trembled when asked, and why every archive sealed files about them with warnings of danger. Late at night, in a quiet data hall where shelves of memory crystals glowed in pale light, a small team of students bypassed the restricted codes, their hands shaking as alarms blinked faint red. They knew they could be expelled, maybe even imprisoned, but something about the signal made them desperate to know. As the system unlocked, old files flickered alive, grainy images filled the air. At first it was only text. Descriptions of planets classified as deathworlds, worlds with violent storms, unstable tectonics, poisonous life, places no civilized species could survive. The aliens leaned closer, confused. Why would anyone live there? Then the second file opened, and their blood ran cold. It showed creatures, humans, walking calmly across these deadly worlds as if the storms were nothing. Their bodies thin, their lifespans short, their skin fragile, yet their eyes burned with a fire unlike anything the students had seen before. One file showed a human soldier standing on a battlefield, smoke all around, enemies twice his size charging, and still the human smiled. Another clip revealed engineers building weapons from scraps inside a ruined city, turning broken machines into tools of war. Another showed pilots strapping into ships even as alarms screamed that engines were failing, not with fear but with laughter. The sound echoed through the hall as the students stared, frozen. It was not laughter of joy, it was something else, something deeper, the sound of defiance, the sound of a race that refused to surrender even when death was certain. The youngest student whispered in disbelief, "How could such fragile beings defy the universe itself?" And another answered with trembling lips, "This is why they were called Deathworlders." The more they searched, the darker the history grew. Reports of entire armadas erased by fleets half their size, battles where humans outlasted starvation, disease, and despair. Victories not because they were stronger but because they never stopped fighting, even when their allies begged them to retreat. The students scrolled through thousands of such files until the system cut them off with a final warning, access denied, by order of the Peace Council. The screens went dark, leaving the group in silence, their hearts pounding, and for the first time they understood why the galaxy had buried this history. Humans were not just another race. They were a storm that laughed as it destroyed everything in its path. Outside the academies, the invaders pressed further into the rim, their fleets dark and sharp, burning colonies without resistance. The council issued empty statements of unity. But people no longer believed. Fear spread faster than the fire, and in that fear the whispers grew. Maybe the humans were not gone. Maybe the signal was their return. Merchants told of strange sightings, a small battered ship with human markings vanishing into jump space. Soldiers reported hearing voices over comms. Strange laughter before their systems went dead. No one could confirm these tales. Yet they spread like a plague, because the galaxy wanted to believe that something stronger than the invaders still existed, even if it was a nightmare. On one lonely moon near the outer rim, an old caretaker who once fought in the last war sat by his fire. His grandchildren pressed him for stories, and though he had sworn never to speak of it again, he could no longer stay silent. He told them of the day he saw humans walk through fire as if it were air, of how their laughter broke the courage of armies, and of how the galaxy begged them to disappear after the last great war. The children listened wide-eyed as he ended with a whisper. The humans are not gone. They are waiting, and the signal you hear is their footsteps returning. Back in the council chamber, the debates grew more heated. One faction shouted for new weapons, another for surrender. But in the middle sat a silent group of elders. They said little, but their eyes revealed what they knew. They had signed the treaties 1,000 years ago. They had buried history. They had erased the humans from memory not to protect the humans, but to protect the galaxy from remembering them. Yet now it was too late. The archives were opening on their own. The young were asking questions, and the shadow of laughter was rising once more. The leader of the council finally stood and spoke the words no one wanted to hear. If the humans return, the invaders are the least of our worries. The galaxy trembled not because of the war that had begun, but because of the war that might follow. The invaders thought they had broken the peace, but in truth they had awakened something far worse, and as the signal echoed again and again through the void, no one knew if they should fear the invaders more, or the sound of human laughter growing louder in the dark. The silence of the rim shattered when a single ship emerged from the void. It was small compared to the vast cruisers of the invaders, its hull old, scarred with lines of battles fought long ago. Its engines flickered like a tired heartbeat, and at first the enemy fleet laughed. To them this vessel looked ancient, fragile, unworthy of even a warning shot. Yet as their senses locked on, a strange unease swept through their crews. The readings made no sense. The energy inside the ship pulsed like a storm locked in a bottle, and the strange mark carved into its steel hull carried a name most of them had never seen before, but their commanders, the older ones, felt their blood run cold, because they recognized it, the mark of humanity. Inside the vessel the humans moved calmly. Their uniforms were simple, not grand or decorated like the invaders' shining armor. But their eyes burned with steady fire. No panic touched their voices. No fear crept into their movements. They had waited centuries for this moment. They had heard the signal and answered. One of them leaned over the comm panel, his lips curving into a smile. And with a press of a button the humans' first words in 1,000 years echoed across the stars. The sound carried into every channel, into every enemy bridge, into every listening post of the galaxy. It was not a warning or a threat. It was laughter, raw and sharp. A sound that shook the confidence of fleets built in arrogance. A sound that reminded the oldest among them of stories buried deep, the laughter of Deathworlders. The invader commander frowned and ordered weapons to lock. His officers hesitated. The sound unsettled them. But his pride refused to let one small relic defy his armada. Missiles armed, cannons charged. A storm of fire unleashed across the void, every weapon in range tearing into the lone human ship. Explosions wrapped it in blinding light, flames swallowing it whole. For a long moment the enemy fleet cheered, convinced the threat was gone. But then the smoke cleared, the human ship still floated, scarred but alive, its shields groaning but holding, and from its speakers came that same sound again. Laughter, louder, stronger, echoing like thunder through their systems. The invaders stared in disbelief. Their voices faltered. How could such an old vessel endure such power? What kind of beings laughed while staring at destruction? On distant worlds the broadcast reached civilian ears. Aliens in marketplaces stopped to listen. Farmers froze in their fields. Children in academies stared wide-eyed as the sound of human laughter filled the airwaves. No words, no speeches, just laughter. Yet it carried more weight than any declaration of war, because it was the sound of confidence, of defiance, of a race that did not fear what others feared. And suddenly the myths told in whispers seemed real again. The Deathworlders were not gone, they had returned, and they had returned with laughter. The invader commander, enraged, ordered a second volley, this time with full power. Entire wings of bombers launched, energy cannons glowed, the void itself trembled with the force of their fire. But as the blasts rushed toward the human ship, something changed. The old vessel moved, not like a tired relic but with impossible speed, dodging through storms of fire, weaving between missiles, its engines screaming like beasts freed from chains. The invaders panicked, their formations broke. The commander roared in fury but his voice cracked as his ships began to vanish from the scanners. One after another swallowed by the weapons of the humans. Weapons no one thought still existed, weapons that turned the void into fire. The humans said nothing more, only their laughter grew, rising like a storm tide, filling every channel, until enemy soldiers tore off their headsets to escape the sound. But there was no escape, because the sound now lived inside their minds. The laughter that once ended empires had returned. Fleets burned, screams filled the comms, but through it all the humans only laughed. Across the galaxy the effect was the same. Fear rippled through systems. Leaders who once mocked the stories now sat in silence, realizing that the invaders had awakened something older and stronger than themselves. People who once felt helpless began to hope twisted with dread, because if the humans could resist the invaders, then what would happen after? No one had the answer, but everyone understood the same truth. The laughter was not only for the invaders, it was for the galaxy itself, a reminder that the Deathworlders had never been destroyed, only waiting for the peace to end. In the human ship the crew stood calm as alarms blared. They were bleeding, their vessel damaged, yet their eyes glowed with purpose. For them this was not an end but a beginning. One officer whispered, "They broke the silence, now we break them." Another chuckled and nodded, and together their laughter filled the bridge. the sound of 1,000 years of waiting finally unleashed, and far beyond, in the cold heart of space, other ships stirred, answering the call, awakening with the same laughter. The galaxy had wanted peace to last forever. But peace was fragile, and humans had never been made for silence. The shadow of war stretched wider now, the invaders retreating not from defeat but from terror. They had felt something they could not explain, something stronger than numbers, stronger than firepower. They had felt the laughter of Deathworlders, and it had broken them. For the first time in 1,000 years the galaxy was no longer quiet. It echoed with laughter, and that sound promised that the real war was only beginning. The invaders thought their second retreat was only temporary, they told themselves it was a tactic, a chance to regroup, but deep inside their captains and soldiers carried a wound no medicine could heal. The sound of human laughter haunted their dreams. It slipped into the silence of their ships, and even when no broadcasts played they swore they could still hear it echoing in the halls. The commanders ordered discipline. They told their soldiers to forget the encounter, but the memory burned too deep. They had seen a relic from another age survive firestorms that should have destroyed it. They had watched their proud fleet scatter in panic before one ship, and worse, they had heard laughter when there should have been screams, a sound that twisted their courage into ash. Back on the human vessel the crew worked in silence, patching damage with calm hands. Every scar on the hull was just another reminder that they had endured. One officer checked the weapons, another repaired the engines, and through it all their captain stood on the bridge with a smile that never faded. He knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The invaders had thought they were the hunters. But by breaking the 1,000-year silence they had woken predators that had never truly vanished. The humans were not fighting for survival. They were fighting for the joy of it, for the challenge, and every laugh on their lips carried that dangerous truth. War was not terror for them, it was home. In the council chambers of the core worlds the leaders argued louder than ever. Some shouted for alliances, others begged for surrender before it was too late. But a handful of elders sat in grim silence. They knew better than anyone what this meant. They had lived long enough to see humans in the old wars, to hear their laughter shake the courage of entire armadas, and they had spent their lives burying that history under lies of peace. Now it was returning. And no law, no treaty, no memory. Wipe could stop it. One elder finally rose, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. She told them that the invaders had not just brought war. They had awakened humanity, and if humanity had returned, then nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. Ordinary citizens felt the change too, in markets, in homes, in schools. Everyone whispered the word they had been told never to speak, humans. Old recordings began to surface. Grainy clips of men and women standing unbroken in the fires of battle. Fragments of speeches filled with strange, raw courage. Images of soldiers grinning as they faced impossible odds. And everywhere the whispers grew, the Deathworlders had returned. Farmers in quiet fields who had never known fear now held there. Children tighter, merchants who once laughed at old myths now shivered at the thought of them being true. And soldiers who had grown soft in peace gripped their weapons harder, wondering if they would ever be enough against such a race. In the outer rim the invaders tried to press forward again, gathering fleets, bringing reinforcements. They told themselves the humans were weak, relics from the past who could not possibly withstand modern power. But when their fleets advanced they found the void waiting, not empty, not quiet, but alive. More human ships emerged from the dark, not shining or new but scarred, ancient, patched with steel and fire, yet they moved with impossible speed. And when the invaders locked weapons once more the humans answered not with silence but with laughter. It filled every frequency, so loud their systems cracked. And then the battle began. One by one the invader ships burned, not because the humans had more weapons but because they had more will. Every strike they took they answered with tenfold. Every scar became a weapon, and through it all they laughed, a sound that shattered the courage of even the bravest enemy commanders. On worlds across the galaxy, citizens watched the battle unfold through scattered transmissions, shaky recordings sent by traders and spies. They saw human ships cutting through armadas. They saw laughter replacing fear. And something strange began to stir. For the first time in centuries the people felt something stronger than terror. They felt awe. It was not safe, it was not comforting, but it was powerful. It was the kind of awe that made them wonder if the humans were the only ones truly alive in this galaxy of peace-grown weakness, and whispers began to rise. Maybe humanity was not a curse but a reminder. Maybe the galaxy needed their fire again. The invaders began to crumble, Not because of human numbers but because of doubt. Their soldiers looked at their commanders with eyes filled with fear, asking questions no leader could answer. How do you fight an enemy that laughs at death? How do you break a race that welcomes the storm? And every time another human broadcast played, every time that laughter reached them, their resolve withered, entire squadrons deserted, ships vanished into hiding, leaving their fleets broken and scattered. And yet the humans did not chase every victory. They moved with purpose, striking here, vanishing there, leaving their enemies guessing where they would appear next. It was not just war. It was a game to them, and they played it with smiles. In the shadows of the galaxy, more human fleets stirred, old bases lit up, forgotten colonies revealed themselves, and as the laughter spread across the stars, the truth became clear to everyone. The 1,000-year peace was over. The invaders had begun the war, but the humans had claimed it, and the galaxy now belonged to their laughter, a laughter that promised only one thing. The real storm had yet to come. Stories of the battles spread faster than light, carried not only by official reports, but by frightened whispers and broken transmissions. On every world, people gathered in taverns, in schools, in marketplaces, to hear the same haunting tale. The invaders had struck with overwhelming force, and yet their mighty fleets had fallen before a handful of human ships. No one could understand it. No one wanted to believe it. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Recordings of scarred vessels weaving like predators through swarms of attackers. Explosions lighting the void as enemy squadrons vanished, and through it all, the sound of laughter, not desperate laughter, not foolish, but calm, steady, defiant. The kind of laughter that made even seasoned generals shiver. The galaxy had grown used to peace, but the humans had not. They had been waiting, and now the galaxy was beginning to realize what that meant. On agricultural colonies, where life had always been quiet and simple, farmers who had never held a weapon now looked to the skies with unease. Their children whispered the word human like a forbidden prayer. Their teachers tried to silence them. But curiosity was stronger than fear, and in every classroom old questions returned. Why had the histories been erased? Why had the councils forbidden the name of Deathworlders? What were they hiding? The younger generation dug deeper, hacking into forbidden files, sharing stories across hidden networks. They found fragments of human culture, tales of exploration, of sacrifice, of impossible battles where weakness became strength, and most of all, of laughter in the face of death. Some saw it as terrifying, others as inspiring. But no one could ignore it anymore. The humans were real, and they were awake. Merchants passing through the rim told stories that only fueled the fire. They swore entire planets had surrendered without a fight the moment human fleets appeared. Not because the humans attacked them, but because their enemies fled in terror. They spoke of commanders who abandoned their posts after hearing one human voice over the comms. A voice that simply said, "We are here," followed by laughter that cracked like thunder. Traders claimed they saw human soldiers on the ground, walking through burning cities with calm steps, carrying wounded aliens on their shoulders while laughing at the chaos around them. These stories spread like wildfire, exaggerated by some, twisted by others, but each one carried the same truth. The humans were not hiding. They were reminding the galaxy what they were. The invaders began to falter, their victories grew fewer, their retreats more common. Their soldiers, once proud and arrogant, now refused to leave orbit without reinforcements. Commanders screamed at their troops to hold the line. But discipline could not erase fear. They had entered the war believing they faced a soft galaxy, one weakened by peace. But instead they had awakened a predator that did not think like them, that did not fear like them. And every time they looked into human eyes on the battlefield, they saw not anger, not hatred, but amusement. As if the humans had been waiting for this war as one waits for an old friend. Back in the council chambers, fear twisted into something worse, division. Some leaders demanded they reach out to the humans, to ally with them against the invaders, but others shouted in terror, insisting the humans were just as dangerous, perhaps more so. One voice rose above the rest, saying that the invaders might destroy colonies, but the humans could destroy civilizations. Their laughter alone was proof of it. Peace had softened everyone else. But the Deathworlders had never softened. They had only sharpened in silence. The debate grew so heated that some councils broke apart. Allies turned on each other with accusations, and in the shadows, spies reported every word to their masters, including the humans, who now watched and listened. On the edge of the galaxy, a great battle unfolded. The invaders brought a massive fleet, thousands of ships, determined to crush the humans once and for all. They poured everything into the attack. Fire brighter than suns. Weapons that split moons apart, and for hours the void burned. But when the smoke cleared, the humans still stood, blooded but smiling. Their ships battered but alive. Their laughter booming through every channel as the invader fleet scattered in shame. That moment was captured by dozens of recordings and spread everywhere. The image of scarred vessels moving through the ruins of enemy fire. The sound of voices laughing at the end of it all. It became a symbol, and with that symbol came a new fear. For if a handful of humans could do this, what would happen when the rest of their kind arrived? In homes across the core worlds, families sat in silence around their screens, watching replay after replay of the battle. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers whispered that the world had changed, and the young looked with wide eyes, caught between awe and dread. In the military academies, cadets trained harder, their instructors pushing them with new urgency. Yet everyone knew the truth: no training could erase, no one could fight like humans. No one could laugh in the face of annihilation and turn it into victory. The galaxy was beginning to understand that the invaders were no longer the true terror. The true terror was that humanity had returned, and their laughter was only growing louder. On the human ships the mood was different, calm, steady, purposeful. They repaired their vessels with care. They sang songs long forgotten by the galaxy, songs of home, of fire, of storms survived. Their laughter came not from arrogance but from certainty. The certainty that they were born from a world that killed the weak and rewarded only the strongest hearts. A world where survival itself was war, and so war was nothing more than life to them. Their captain stood before his crew, his voice low but fierce, telling them that the invaders had made one mistake. They had broken the silence, and now the humans would break everything else. The crew laughed together, the sound rolling like thunder across steel walls, and beyond, through the vast dark, other human fleets stirred, answering the call with the same terrible joy. The galaxy had hoped the war would be short, that the invaders would be satisfied, that the peace could somehow return. But peace was gone, burned away, and in its place stood a truth more powerful than fear. The Deathworlders were awake, and the laughter of humanity was not fading. It was spreading, reaching every corner, promising that the real storm had only just begun. The invaders grew desperate. They gathered what remained of their strength into one colossal armada, a fleet so vast it blotted out the stars as it moved. Their warlords screamed that this was the only way to crush the humans, to drown their laughter in fire. They brought war machines the galaxy had never seen, weapons that shattered moons, ships the size of cities, soldiers bred only for battle. They believed that sheer numbers would break the Deathworlders, but deep inside even their commanders knew the truth. Numbers had never mattered against humans. Still they marched forward, driven by fear disguised as pride. They told themselves that this time the humans would fall. But none of them dared whisper the question that lingered in their hearts. What if the humans laughed again? In the council chambers chaos reigned. Messages poured in of the invaders' colossal fleet. Many leaders demanded retreat. Others pleaded to beg for mercy. But a few dared to speak differently. They said the galaxy had no choice but to stand behind the humans, that only the Deathworlders could stop what was coming. Yet their words were met with fear and outrage. To ally with humans was to invite destruction. To bring predators into the heart of their fragile worlds. The debates turned to shouting, and outside the chambers the people already knew the answer. It did not matter what the councils decided. The humans had already chosen the battlefield. On the edge of human space the fleets waited, not in polished formation like the invaders but in silence. Their ships were scarred, ancient, patched with steel and fire. Yet they floated with a calm that felt heavier than any weapon. The crews stood ready, their faces steady, their eyes burning with anticipation. On every bridge laughter rolled quietly, not wild or careless, but low and certain. The kind of laughter that said the outcome was already written. They had lived for this, trained for this, and now they would answer. The captain of the leading ship raised his voice across the comms. His words carried to every vessel. They broke our silence, now we break their pride. His crew erupted into laughter, and in that sound the fleet came alive. When the invaders arrived, the stars vanished, their numbers endless, their weapons glowing like newborn suns. They filled the void with threats and promises of annihilation. Yet across all channels came only one reply, the laughter of Deathworlders, sharp, unshaken, mocking. The invader commanders clenched their fists, rage burning in their chests, and then they gave the order. The void exploded, fire rained down, missiles streaked across the dark. Cannons roared until even space itself seemed to scream, but when the storm cleared the humans still stood, their ships torn and scarred but alive, their laughter louder than before, a sound that split through the fire like a blade. The invaders faltered, and in that hesitation the humans struck. The first wave of human ships moved with impossible speed, weaving through enemy lines like hunters through a herd. Their weapons tore into ships 10 times their size, ripping apart formations that had never been broken. Every strike was met with cheers, every explosion with laughter. The invaders tried to regroup, to crush them with sheer force, but the humans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like storms, unpredictable, relentless, laughing as they tore through walls of steel. Invader officers screamed for discipline, but their crews shook in terror. Some refused to fight, others fled into the void, and in the middle of the chaos stood the humans, calm, unshaken, their laughter echoing across every channel until it drowned the sound of war itself. On distant worlds the battle was broadcast in fragments, shaky recordings smuggled through broken networks. The people of the galaxy watched in silence as the impossible unfolded. They saw armadas burn, warlords fall, and through it all the humans never wavered. For the first time in centuries the galaxy felt something it had not known in the age of peace. Awe. It was not safe, it was not comforting, but it was powerful. It was the kind of awe that made them realize the stories were true. The Deathworlders had returned, and nothing in existence could stand against them. Children whispered their name with both fear and admiration. Elders closed their eyes remembering the old days, and leaders who once scoffed at the myths now sat trembling in silence. The invaders lost control of the battle, their ships scattering like frightened prey, but the humans did not chase them all. They struck with precision, breaking the strongest, letting the weak flee, not because they could not destroy them but because they wanted the survivors to carry the message. War was not their burden, it was their answer, and their laughter was the proof. Every survivor who fled carried with them the sound of that laughter. It haunted their dreams. It broke their will. And soon entire fleets surrendered before even firing a shot, too afraid to hear that sound again. Back on the human flagships the mood was steady. The crews laughed together, but not in celebration. It was not the end, only the beginning. Their captain looked at the ruins drifting outside the viewport, his voice calm as he spoke. This was their question, and now they have their answer. His officers chuckled, their hands already preparing for the next battle. For the humans did not fight for peace. They fought because this was who they were, born from worlds that tried to kill them every day. They had never known peace as the galaxy defined it. For them survival was war, and war was survival. Laughter was only the truth spoken out loud. The galaxy shivered at the thought. The invaders had unleashed a storm they could not control, and now everyone knew that the humans had returned not just to fight, but to remind the stars of what they had always been, Deathworlders. And their laughter was not fading, it was spreading, rolling through the void like thunder, promising that the end of peace was only the first step in something far greater, something no one else was ready for. The battlefield was silent now, broken ships drifting like skeletons across the void, their fires dimming as the wreckage floated aimlessly between shattered moons. But the silence was not peace. It was the silence that comes after a storm, heavy and dangerous, the kind that warns of another wave yet to arrive. Survivors whispered over fractured comms, their voices shaking as they reported what they had seen. Fleets shattered not by numbers but by will, commanders humiliated not by speeches but by laughter, and the word carried across the stars. Faster than light, humans, the Deathworlders, they had returned, and their return was not the rebirth of war, it was the end of peace itself. On the core worlds panic spread, markets closed, citizens rioted, governments declared emergencies. Yet no law could silence the whispers. The laughter still rang in their minds. People who had never seen humans suddenly felt as if they knew them. They remembered stories their grandparents had once told. Stories dismissed as fantasy, of fragile creatures who smiled in the face of annihilation, who stood where no one else dared stand. And now those stories were real again. Parents clutched their children close, unsure if the return of humans was salvation or doom. And the councils could no longer hide the truth. The Deathworlders had come back, and the galaxy would never be the same. Among the invaders, fear spread like poison. Warlords who once promised victory now sat in silence, staring at reports they could not deny. Entire fleets lost to laughter and fire, soldiers refusing to fight, commanders abandoning their posts. The mighty war machine that once threatened the galaxy crumbled from within. Not because of human weapons but because of human will. They had not been beaten by numbers. They had been broken by certainty, by the realization that they had awakened. Something no power could stop. Some warlords argued to continue the fight, others begged for peace. But all of them knew the same truth. They had lost the war the moment the first human laughed. In hidden corners of the galaxy, more human fleets stirred, old colonies long thought abandoned powered up again. Forgotten arsenals opened. Weapons forged in the age of blood glowed once more. The laughter of one ship had become the laughter of many, and soon it would be the laughter of an armada. The invaders had awakened more than warriors. They had awakened an entire race that had been silent only by choice. Now that silence was broken, the humans would not stop, not until the galaxy remembered why it had feared them. On the ground, in burning cities where alien civilians hid in shelters, the arrival of humans was different. They did not slaughter or conquer. They moved calmly, pulling rubble aside, carrying wounded on their shoulders, sharing food from their own rations. Their eyes sharp, their bodies scarred, yet their voices steady. They laughed even here, in the ruins, laughter that eased fear, that told the helpless that someone stronger stood with them. To some it was terrifying, to others it was salvation, but to all it was unforgettable. The humans were not just soldiers, they were survivors, and their laughter carried the promise that survival was possible even in the darkest storm. Back in the academies, young students who had once studied peace now watched recordings of human battles with wide eyes. Some trembled, afraid of what the future held. But others felt something new awaken inside them, a hunger, a fire, a desire to be more. They whispered to each other that the galaxy needed humans, that without them the invaders would have destroyed everything, and though their teachers tried to silence these thoughts, the truth could not be hidden. The Deathworlders had shown the galaxy what strength truly was, and the new generation would never forget it. In the council chambers, despair weighed heavy. Leaders argued not about whether to fight but about how to survive in a galaxy where humans had returned. Some insisted they reach out to form alliances. Others warned that alliances with Deathworlders were as dangerous as war itself. One elder stood, his voice weak but clear. He said that peace had been an illusion, a fragile lie that could never last, that the humans had always been the truth beneath it, and now that truth had broken free. Silence fell on the chamber, and no one dared to disagree, because in their hearts they knew he was right. On the flagship of the human fleet, the captain looked out at the ruins of battle, the stars painted with fire and steel, his crew silent behind him, waiting, and then he smiled, a low chuckle breaking the quiet. The sound spread among his officers, until the bridge shook with laughter once more. It was not madness, it was not cruelty, it was certainty. They had waited for this war, they had prepared for it, and now it had come. The 1,000-year peace was over, and humanity was ready. The captain's voice rolled across every channel, steady and cold. They wanted war, now they will have it. And the laughter that followed carried across the void, heard by friends, by enemies, by every listening ear in the galaxy. The galaxy trembled as the final truth became clear. The invaders had not just ended a millennium of peace, they had awakened a storm. The Deathworlders were not saviors, they were not conquerors, they were both and neither. They were humanity, and their laughter was the sound of the end beginning. In every world, in every chamber, in every home, the same thought whispered through the dark. If this is how they laugh at the start of the war, how will they laugh at the end?